Well, the Taliban are now on the containers above, well, beyond the British lines. Things have calmed down quite a lot. I think that people are beginning to understand that if they're rioting or they're shouting and screaming and rushing at the front, there's no way they can get any work done. So the processing is taking place here. So that's the British side. We're now moving up here. Now this is going towards the Americans. There's people, this pen has been slightly emptied. I think this is the area where they're going to the United States, they're getting processed. We now know that the United States will only accept people with either passports, visas or green cards. Pretty much everyone else, they're on their own because they can't really cope with the numbers that are trying to get into the States. It was always a lot more than the United Kingdom. But have a look at this in here. These people have been here for days probably. I mean, it is actually quite remarkable. Thousands upon thousands are in here. They're surrounded by American soldiers on some side, and these are Brit soldiers here who are assisting, and they're somewhat penned in while they do try to go through the process period. You know, it is calmer than it was yesterday. It was hard yesterday, but much better today. As I said, the message has to get through to the people that if you don't do as you're told and you don't just wait, there is no way they can process anyone. But it is pretty miserable in there. There's not much water. They've been there for hours, some of them days. And all the time you get that sense that, you know, this air operation, this relief operation has a limited time in it. There's much discussion amongst the politicians as to whether it can be extended. A lot of that will to do with what the Taliban has to say. But it's grim work, it's calmer, but that could change any time.
Could change at any time.
So that's the latest from Kabul Airport.
You know, you noticed there's no masks. Where are all the masks?
No COVID. COVID is suspended this week.
Oh, in Afghanistan?
Yeah, not just the British Parliament.
Right, they didn't have any masks on?
No social distancing.
They were talking about Afghanistan.
For the first time in 2 years, the entire British Parliament sat. And for the first time in 6 years, we're united on one issue. Unanimous vote in the British Parliament.
With no masks?
With no masks, no social distancing. They suspended COVID because this clearly is more important to them.
Yeah.
Temporarily, anyway.
So it's only what's important, really. I mean, if something more important comes along than COVID, then COVID is bye-bye. COVID is relegated to the importance that it really always had and has today, which is not very important at all, except in the sense of giving an opportunity for governments to, you know, have fun with controlling the population and selling them vaccines up the wazoo.
Playing around with viruses, selling vaccines.
Selling vaccines up the wazoo and booster shots and fourth booster shots. So you may notice my esteemed mater mother is here again today.
Hi, Patsy.
She's here to get all the lowdown on whether she should or should not be getting booster shots ad infinitum going forward for years to come, every 6 months. She's not sure, but she's going to find out on this show today whether it's a good idea or not. So yeah, Pakistan, not Pakistan, we'll talk about Pakistan in a minute, but Afghanistan,
You notice that it's pretty calm.
Yeah.
That wasn't the histrionic reporting that some reports, including his own, have given over the last week.
Yeah.
And he suggested it may not last long, i.e. the Taliban are at the gates, the barbarians are at the gates. But I think it's pretty clear after 7 days that the Taliban are not about to do anything crazy.
No, you know what all those people are doing there? They're all trying to get into America.
Uh-huh.
They're not trying to get away from the Taliban. They're trying to get into America. Because there's some suggestion, and there has been some reports that prior to or around the time that they left, that the Americans left, that they were handing out blank visa certificates, visa forms, whatever, visa cards basically that people could fill in themselves. Just blank, fill in your name, you've got a visa to come to America. So that was their, they left. I'll have to look into it, but it sounds plausible as to why all these people would suddenly think that they need to leave Kabul, And, there's lots of context that people need to remember about the situation. Kabul is a city of about 5 million people. As many people as you see in these reports at the airport, you're talking about thousands. You're talking about a fraction of 1% of the population of Kabul at that airport. So a fraction of 1% of the population of Kabul are actually trying to get to America. And they're probably the ones who have some kind of a pass or some kind of a visa that was given to them beforehand.
Or family in America.
Right. Yeah. Or some kind of a justification that they think...
or they worry that their work with the old regime will be noticed by the Taliban, and that their lives are at stake.
Possibly.
I mean,
Well,
there's real terror at the airport too. People have died in the crush. There've been panics.
Yeah, well, initially the first reports of people being shot were shot by U.S. soldiers. 5 people were shot by U.S. soldiers. So what were they trying to do? I don't know. But yeah, you hear a lot of reference to interpreters. Let's get our interpreters out. These people who have interpreters, like Afghans, who have worked with the Americans all these years, or over a number of years recently, in their employ. And you hear interpreters, translators. The problem with interpreters and translators is that's a nice term in that context. It's a nice term for collaborators, basically, or people who actually turned against, in a certain sense, turned against their own people, or at least turned against
informants,
the Taliban.
even.
Yeah, they're informants. They're people who would go to houses with American soldiers and be involved in interrogations, possibly, but also involved in gathering information from the population and giving it to the Americans. So the Americans can then go and,
Well, the CIA handed out God knows how much in hard dollars over the last 20 years in cash as bait. Come, tell us anything at all about anyone.
Yeah.
And
so you see all this.
That would entice people.
Yeah, for sure. But you see all these bleeding hearts on Twitter talking about, you get these interpreters and the people have served us so well and stuff.
Yeah.
How did they served you? But how do ordinary people, or how do some people in Afghanistan look on those people? I mean, it's a complicated situation. There's no nuance or no understanding, no real thinking involved in for the most part, from the media or from the Twitterati when they're commenting on this. They don't really understand the situation. They don't think about it in real terms. They just think about it in their ideological black and white simplistic terms.
They see them and they go, behind the dish dab and the man dress is an American just bursting to get out. And
right.
That's why he's desperately trying to get to the States.
For sure, yeah.
It's not that simple. I don't want to say anything that's, again, large brushes and stuff, but in parallel, what's unsaid by the Twitterati is that it's a fact that in Europe, by far, the single largest migrant/refugee group that commits crimes in Europe in the last 5 years plus are Afghanis, not the Syrians or anything like that. So what's the quiet part that has not been said is that there's also a counter pressure coming from European governments, European peoples anyway, and the United States as well, to not let tens of thousands of people coming in. So,
well, they've had a bad experience with refugees. A lot of people have some people have had good experience with refugees over the past number of years, but a lot of them have had bad experiences with refugees, especially in Germany and, well, in European countries that allowed a large number of them in. If you remember, I know news cycles, you really only, what are news cycles now? 5 minutes now? Well, they're a day, maybe 2 days. You ask people to remember a couple of years ago, it's like, I don't remember what happened a couple of years ago. But if you think hard, you can remember refugee crises, and also in different countries in Europe, large number of refugees coming in, setting up camps in Paris, for example, tents all along boulevards in Paris, for example, and stuff. But speaking of the Taliban, Scotty, there's a xinhuanet.com article I just want to pull up. It's just from today.
That sounds Chinese.
It is Chinese.
That's propaganda.
I know.
Don't open it, Scotty.
It's the Chi-Coms. Xinhua.net is it's probably the only one we have there from that particular website. It is a Chinese outlet. It's in the group I sent you.
I can't find it because it's right in front of my nose.
There you go, 'cause it's right in front of you. Taliban vows to have ties with all countries, denies kidnapping of foreigners at Kabul Airport. So this is just a counter to the claims you're seeing from Western media over the past number of days. And if you just scroll down to the first highlighted text there, just a few bullet points. The Taliban said it intended to have diplomatic and trade ties with all countries around the world, including the United States. Taliban officials denied reports that foreign nationals were kidnapped near the Kabul airport. And US President Joe Biden once again defended this decision for the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. So that's basically, the Taliban seem to be, striking a fairly moderate tone, not just in word but in action.
Yeah.
They aren't doing anything horrible to people at Kabul Airport. They could do a lot worse, obviously, and they're not.
They've
So-
stated multiple times there'll be no recriminations and so on.
right.
Today, or yesterday probably, Afghanistan time, they were in talks with Hamid Karzai, the former puppet president, US installed
Hmm.
president and former, he was on the board of some oil company. Unicol.
He was
Yeah.
at the beginning, just before 9/11. Unicol was an oil company, and there were other oil companies, American and British oil companies, involved in conversations, dialogue, meetings with Taliban representatives at the time in Afghanistan. So about 2000, late 1990s, 2000, about building a pipeline across Afghanistan down to the Persian Gulf, and apparently the Taliban, I don't know, they were offered the famous quote is that they were offered a carpet of bombs, or a carpet of gold, or a carpet of bombs, gold being the revenues from oil, or a carpet of bombs. This was a kind of threat: if you don't let us in to do what we want to do in terms of our geopolitical policies, that American government's geopolitical policies in the region, if you don't facilitate those, then, and the Taliban they dithered too long, or they prevaricated a bit too long, and I think a different agenda anyway supplanted that plan to make a deal with the Taliban, because there's a plan to the people who wanted to have a presence in Afghanistan, a military presence for a long term. They kind of prevailed. So I don't think those talks were ever really going to go anywhere, and obviously 9/11 became the justification for the invasion of Afghanistan, which, as we mentioned on our previous shows, I think last week, that was very much a part of Western and particularly US geopolitical goals and aims for its empire and for the world, basically, for that part of the world. So anyway, Hamid Karzai, he's been
He's
chatting.
Yeah, he didn't even flee the country. He was in his in retirement in his big house.
Yeah.
Don't know where exactly, maybe outskirts of Kabul,
Yeah.
and he's in his home. He's got Taliban seated next to him.
Yeah.
They're all dressed alike. They're all talking alike. Peace, rebuilding the country, yada yada. Another small datum: the guy who fled, Ashraf Ghani, popped up in Oman.
Mhm. Oh man.
Where else are you going to go? But another oil-rich Saudi state, Gulf state. His brother does a swearing-in ceremony where his brother, also Ghani, formally, I don't know, did some swearing in, formally joined the Taliban. So he didn't flee. And these guys, they're all connected. I mean, Karzai, he's a smart player. He's been around since the beginning. He was involved in negotiating the first arrival of the first incarnation of the Taliban in 1994 to try and end, and it did work actually. It ended a civil war in the early 90s in Afghanistan, so that by 1996 they were consolidated under one government, Taliban version 1. But their entrance into the country from Pakistan was negotiated by Hamid Karzai. Then I think living in the US.
Yeah, he was on the board of that oil company, Unicol.
It's astonishing. The same figures that pop up. There's two big people we need to look at, but not in general. On an ongoing basis, there are two figures. Hamid Karzai is one because of his connections, and the other one is probably more powerful. Khalilzad, is that his name? Zalmay Khalilzad or something like that.
Yeah. We talked about him last
Through
week.
and through neocon,
Yeah.
signatory to that infamous PNAC document.
These are famous. These are the type of people. They're basically expats. They're basically former, because there's a long history that people really you can't.
Afghan elites, genuine
can't-
Afghan elites.
You can't understand any of this unless you understand the history, going back really to the end of the Second World War, after the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. You have to understand all of that to understand what's happening today. It's the same with anything, really. You have to understand history to understand where you are today. But we
we were live last week when there was breaking news that the Taliban were in the palace and
Yeah.
Ghani had fled.
Yeah.
And we just about got the first images
Right.
of
So it's about a
and
week, yeah.
comparisons being made between Saigon,
Yeah.
the ignoble exit of the United States from Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And we commented on how remarkably similar symbolically
Mm-hmm.
the looks, the optics were. Subsequent events, like the next 3 or 4 days, I mean, we were understating the matter as to how it, as I said it last week, if you were scripting the worst possible look for an exit, this is what you would do.
Yeah.
With America being the bad guy, the fall guy,
Mm-hmm.
held in contempt by, well, its allies,
Yep.
allies and foes alike. Well, laughed at by its foes, but
Mhm.
held in contempt by its
Mhm.
allies. And yeah, it's been an incredible week of just that. And
The question.
very little dissidence, or, there can be no distance. It's almost like reality slammed head first into the reality creation of the last 20 years. And it's so strong. It's so everyone agrees, more or less, this is reality. This is taking place. And then the hand wringing and the reasons why, well, they all go off on their own angle and slant and reasons.
Mhm.
But it's been a remarkable week in the unanimous agreement from CNN to Trump supporters, from the British Parliament to, heck, American and British allies in the region around Afghanistan as to what has just taken place. Similarly, though, there's
What's the
unanimous.
consensus?
The consensus agrees that they don't understand what just happened.
Mm-hmm. And that Biden is responsible.
Right. What happened there? Why? What's going on? Like it's. But maybe what I've just said answers that already. Maybe it's as simple as it looks. It's so strong that the media and Biden's people, the deep state, etc., can't help him.
We have to blame somebody. It looks pretty bad, so you have to blame somebody. I mean, you have people falling off planes. I mean, when you consider America's image and the image that America has for most Americans, let's say, of what they do around the world, right? They spread freedom and democracy. That's the narrative, the very childish, silly, stupid, ignorant narrative that people have held on to for decades, that America, when its military is around the world, it's simply spreading freedom and democracy. That's all it is. There is no selfish intent, right? I mean, the American government is the only group of people in the world that the rest of the people in the world do not ascribe any selfish intent to whatsoever. They're immune. They're some kind of saints, right? There can never be any selfish intent, any self-serving motivation on the part of the American government when it sends its military overseas. It's always for good. It's always to do the best thing. And if it gets messed up, well, that's just unfortunate, and we can always blame the people that we tried to free, that freedom just didn't take with them, you know what I mean? Which is a reasonable enough narrative to some extent, but, it's obviously very, very, very stupid and childish, right? But the question as to... So that image that they have of America, and then the contrasting image of an American military plane flying up into the air and 2 or 3 people falling off it to their deaths, clinging on to it. You probably couldn't get anything more contrasting with the idea that American military presence around the world is about freedom and democracy, right? I mean, it's almost, there's something very poignant about it in a certain sense, because you could almost spin it as, we brought so much freedom and democracy and instilled so much freedom and democracy into these Afghanis that they were willing to risk their lives and lose their lives in order to get some of that freedom and democracy. You know what I mean? Just the mere presence of the American military and the American system in Afghanistan over so many years was absorbed by these Afghanis, and they just decided that it was better to die or risk death to get back home on. But then also the problem is it's a very negative image as well, because it's reckless, it's negligent, it's not doing the right thing, right? That's the fairy story version of it, right? The reality probably is, in terms of why this happened, because the big question comes up is, the US, as we mentioned in the show last week, negotiated um, negotiated an agreement with the Taliban 18 months ago to basically hand power over to them. Initially by May this year, and then extended by Biden to end of August this year, after a few more months. So they had basically 18 months.
So a plan is unfolding.
The
according
plan
to
has
schedule.
been unfolding over 18 months. So at what point did you decide to leave thousands of American and Western citizens in Kabul, in Afghanistan in general, but mainly in Kabul, and also any people that you had promised or that you had a responsibility to give them visas or take them back home? At what point did you just leave them there? At what point was the decision made to leave them there? How could you have factored that in, where you would just leave them? You leave, the military leaves, all the military, industrial, whatever government apparatus leaves, but leaves all the civilian, a lot of civilian contractors and a lot of civilian and their families. And like I said, Afghanis there. How did that happen? That's the big question that nobody is answering. Lots of hand wringing and questioning about it and stuff. I mean, if Joe Biden even asked directly, you know, more or less that question, and he turns around and says, that was 4 or 5 days ago, you know, when those
we
people are
have that
falling off
clip.
planes.
After 3-4 days where incognito, Joe Biden just
People have probably
missing.
seen it, but we want to play it?
Yeah, let's
All
play
right.
it because it's so bad, but it's historic.
Tell it up there.
His interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC News on Wednesday,
Yeah.
Thursday. I think it was 3 or 4 days afterwards.
Right.
Can you find it, Scott?
ABC.
There it is.
I think it's a YouTube clip. There's just 3 minutes of it, and it's devastating. And this is the edited version. Someone pointed out the transcript released by the White House actually has worse exchanges.
Yeah.
So ABC, before they published this on TV news and then on the internet, made sure it was just.
Just the worst, just the
The
best
least
of the worst.
worst
Yeah, the
bits.
least worst parts, yeah.
But it's not just him, though. I mean, the White House as a whole was silent. Whenever a statement was issued, the State Department was saying one thing and the Pentagon was saying another. And then an anonymous White House source said a third thing. Like, they seem to be genuinely in a kerfuffle here. How does that happen? Well, I think that the point... On the surface, this is what it looks like. Beginning on August 5th, the Taliban rapidly started taking provincial capital after provincial capital.
Mm-hmm.
By August 15th, they're walking into the palace in Kabul. That's
Right.
10 days.
Right.
The plain fact chronology there is that they were surprised by the speed with which it happened.
No, they weren't surprised by any of that. Obviously, they weren't surprised by any of that. I mean, they knew. I mean, they've been in the country for 20 years.
Yeah.
They know their enemy very well. They know where the Taliban are. They know that over the past year, basically, they've only had 2,500 troops, along with the quote-unquote Afghan army that completely kind of disappeared whenever those 2,500 American troops left.
As
and
many
the
as
infrastructure-
15,000.
And the infrastructure leaves that army of supposedly 300,000 men just collapses. I mean, that's pretty remarkable, right? You've trained over how many years? 300,000 soldiers, and they suddenly just disappear overnight. Obviously, the U.S. government, the people who are overseeing the occupation of Afghanistan, the mission, I should say, it's called a mission, right? It's kind of like a religious thing, a mission.
Yeah,
The religious
it is
mission,
a missionary type.
the religious mission, American mission in Afghanistan, they know very well the situation. They know what's going to happen. They plan for it for 18 months. They know what the Taliban are going to do. They probably agreed it with them.
Yeah, that's
So the
that's what we
question-
have to ask.
But the answer to that
Was this
question
agreed?
is the question here is not why were all those people left there. It's that, well, that is the question, and the answer to it is, or the question rather is, why are we having all these scenes of people clamoring, massive crowds, gunfire, chaos at the airport and people falling off planes and stuff as they try to... That's what they didn't expect. That's the only thing they didn't expect. They didn't expect that there'd be so many people, and it's mostly Afghanis, desperately trying to get out. Of course,
well, there are 40,000 Western people
Well-
who are also trying to get out. Germany's got 7,000 people alone,
yeah.
and they haven't made a dent. They're sending planes.
The thing is that would have preceded normally the evacuation of those people. Not evacuation, just the repatriation, the coming home one could have proceeded normally, and probably would have proceeded normally, and was part of an agreement with the Taliban that would proceed in a normal, calm, orderly fashion, except for the fact you had masses, relative, very small percentage of the population of Kabul, but a significant number of people nonetheless, who all desperately wanted to get out as well. They were the ones who weren't told. The ordinary people of who were in some way associated with the American occupation of Afghanistan, and even ones that weren't, because like I said, apparently there were people handing out visas basically to all and sundry. You could blank visas, fill in your name, and you can come to America. And they probably didn't expect the crowd, the large numbers of people who would flood the airport and had that reaction of a kind of a desperation and a fear. Maybe I don't even know if it was fear. People think they're spinning it in the media as fear of the Taliban. I think it was desperation to go to America. I don't want to be left here. Sure, a little bit of fear of what kind of situation, what kind of rule the Taliban would impose, but they wanted to leave the country, and they saw this as a last opportunity for them to leave the country. And I mean, you're talking about the madness of crowds here in a certain sense. I mean, you can explain the chaos at that airport just by the madness of crowds. Everybody rushing an airport to try and get on planes that weren't available, and it was that crowd that wasn't expected by the Americans when they left. They didn't expect that their leaving would have that. Would provoke that response.
Are you suggesting that's the only X factor in this? That the only thing that threw it off?
Yeah.
Okay, but then
that's the
why
Occam's razor explanation.
Why did Biden and Blinken and the chief of defense Lloyd? Why do they all look like they look like deer in the headlights?
Yeah,
they have done since last Sunday
because they weren't expecting it.
So this was thrown in there. They didn't anticipate this. So
but nobody did. Even the ones...
No. What I mean is that they didn't expect to be leaving Afghanistan.
No, they did. They knew
by August 15th.
No, they did. Of course they knew they were leaving Afghanistan. They didn't expect the response from, like I said, a very small percentage, a fraction of 1% of the population of Kabul. But you have to remember the population of Kabul is about 5 million people. Mm-hmm. So what's 1% of 5 million people? Somebody do the math for me. I don't know. Anyway, it's a lot. It's a bunch.
So, right? Okay, but to follow through, that is simple and neat. It makes sense, but let me just test it a bit. It means that on August 15th, they knew that the Taliban was going to be in the palace roughly that day and declaring victory or whatever and beginning of a new regime.
There wasn't much triumphalism.
And that thereafter then would only begin the evacuation of 40,000 or so American
Well, I don't
citizens.
know, 40,000. I haven't heard the number 40,000, but like I mean,
I've heard it's high. Germany has 7,000. I mean, a lot of NGOs.
Yeah. But that could have all proceeded normally on an agreement with the Taliban. I mean, maybe you could say it was risky or whatever, but like I said, they signed an agreement with the Taliban 18 months ago for a transfer of power. And over the past 18 months, that transfer of power has been proceeding.
Yeah.
Although not directly. The transfer of power largely involved the US getting its stuff, its ducks in a row, it's organising its all of its infrastructure in Afghanistan to leave, and it's definitely going to take that amount of time to get to remove that entire infrastructure, all the stuff that they need to get out of there, and they did so up until basically July this year, and that's when Biden was asked, and he said, no, it's not going to end up like Saigon. It's all going to be fine.
Well, because the people telling him what to say in July when he said it's not going to be Saigon. Mm-hmm. Which is precisely what it was.
Yeah.
Why were they misleading him?
They weren't misleading him. They didn't know either.
Well, who knows?
Nobody.
Because the people who tell... Biden is more than happy to say whatever the deep state / shadow government / whatever it is, CIA intelligence committee wants him to say.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting that the people who agreed this deliberately misled the president so that he would look like an absolute idiot.
No, I'm not saying that. They didn't know either. Nobody knew. Nobody expected that the US leaving in this way would provoke this kind of a reaction from, like I said, a small percentage of the population of Kabul, that they would rush the airport. And when you rush an airport, that's it. How are you going to... I mean, they're on the frickin' runway. How do you get flights out of an airport? How does your orderly...
They have to send in helicopters.
How does
ahead
your
of the
orderly
planes.
transition of removing people that you expect to remove after the military's gone, now let's deal with the civilians and the civilian contractors and stuff like that, and other personnel that, first and foremost, US citizens. How do you get planes in and out to take those people out? There's maybe, like you said, up to 40,000. I don't know if there's that many, but at least 10,000 plus, 15, 20,000. You're going to need quite a lot of flights in and out over a period of several days to get all those people out, and you do it calmly and there's no rush. But how do you get those planes to fly in and land and take off from Kabul Airport when the runway is covered in tens of thousands of Afghanis who all want to go too but aren't eligible? And they're pretty desperate, and they're demanding that they get to go as well. So all it takes for the situation to happen is the naivety and the lack of reading of the situation by the American
National security state as a whole.
whoever
Yeah.
who are reading the situation to miss that to not expect that eventuality, that you'd have that response. And they can just, like I said at the beginning of the show, they can turn around and say, well, just shows you freedom of democracy really is appealing to these people, you know, at least some of them. About 0.1% of the population of Kabul took with them, just not the rest. So where's the rest of the population of Kabul? I mean, I keep stressing that fact, 5 million people. How many people do you see at the airport? You're not talking hundreds of thousands, you're talking tens of thousands. Still, when you see tens of thousands of people at an airport, that's a lot of people at one point at an airport. Tens of thousands, maybe 30, 40,000 people in an airport. That's still only a tiny percentage of the population of Kabul. Where's the rest of them? Out of 5 million. Where are the other 490... Where are the other 4,960,000 people, if you allow for 40 at the airport?
Okay, that's people. American people, interpreters in quotes, and whoever else. That's the people. What about the, quote, billions and billions worth of US military equipment?
That's all gone already. That's all been gone. Well, they left some. They left
understood.
Humvees and all that
That's
kind of
gone
stuff.
with the understanding the Taliban would have it.
Yeah, I think so. That was probably part of, and again, the media
agree.
saying there's maybe put out numbers of 2,000 Humvees. It wasn't a lot, you know. It was 2,000 Humvees, a bunch of weapons, guns, that kind of stuff. But I mean, yeah, when the U.S. military is gone, like and the British military and other major militaries that were there in smaller quantities, when they're all gone, and you have to remember there's a massive infrastructure there. Like it's not Kabul. There's what do you call it? Bagram Air Base, you know. Bagram Air Base, go and look at Google Maps at Bagram Air Base. It's been there quite a long time. It was back in Soviet times or even before Soviet times when it was first built, but it's been massively expanded. Freaking McDonald's and Quickie Mart, I don't know, Dunkin' Donuts, Chipotle, the whole lot. It was like a city, right? I mean, there's a whole...
The whole strip mall, yeah.
I mean, you have to understand the extent
The
of
scale of
the
it.
scale of the
At one point,
installment that they had there, you know. And
they were shipping in crates of cash in the
Yeah.
2000s, billions, big
And-
cash.
you remove all that takes a long time. You need 18 months, and of course the military aspect of it is is the most important. You're shipping out all your military equipment. So if it's true that there's 2,000 Humvees left there, they were left on purpose. And
Yeah.
Humvees aren't really much use. They're glorified cars, right? They're just like armored cars. They're not. What are you going to do with 2,000 Humvees? Left a bunch of rifles, a bunch of weapons. But I've seen the videos of the Taliban showing the stuff that they got. It's insignificant. So that was all left on purpose. That doesn't feed into the idea of those. This was some kind of a moonlight flit, a moonlight escape type thing. It's ridiculous. It doesn't fit with what we know to be the fact. Is that 18 months ago they signed a deal to transfer power to the Taliban. They had plenty of time to do everything, to get everything out of there that they wanted. And they did get everything out of there they wanted, including most of their personnel. And then, you know, so the first thing you do as part of a plan, the Taliban are allowed to obviously are going to retake different cities and stuff. And as they come towards Kabul, you want to make sure by the time they get to Kabul, just from the point of view of there not being any mistakes or any issues, you want your military presence to be down to zero, including personnel and all equipment. So you don't want them to take it, and you don't want any of your American or other military personnel to be there. So they're all gone. Taliban have agreed, everyone will be cool, because they're being given back the country. So they're fine. They say, listen, we'll have a bunch of people still there. that are just kind of wrapping up. You know, the ones kind of like turning off the lights and locking the doors and stuff. We'll get those out after you're there. I'm sure we'll have an agreement with you that there'll be no problems. And the Taliban have said that there'll be no problem with anybody who wants to leave the country leaving the country. They're voicing an aspect of the agreement that was made 18 months ago. The wild card in all of this is a Shiite load, no pun intended, because they're mostly Sunni, a Shiite load of Afghanis rushing the airport and causing the scenes that we saw that no one expected.
Is it okay? Got it. Is it possible that in addition they did not expect the Afghan National Army / government behind it to fall so fast?
No, they probably did. That was part. I'm sure they
I
had
say
that.
that. I say that because in the Financial Times' recap of similarly historic moments, they write it was 3 years after the Soviet withdrawal in 1989 that its Kabul ally fell in 1992. It was 2 years after the US military left Vietnam before Saigon fell. So the regime install can last a bit longer than...
Well, you said yourself last week.
Here it seemed to fall in advance. Its fall precipitated the departure.
You said yourself last week that at the meeting between the Trump administration, quote unquote, the Trump administration, but really the State Department and the Washington establishment types, the career diplomats, all this kind of stuff. The meeting in February 2020, 18 months ago, that handed power, basically transition over to the Taliban, that the existing government, the puppet US puppet government, were not involved. That makes it very clear at that point that the expectation was that this government and its associated military were not going to be involved in any of this. So the idea that they fell and all this kind of stuff is nonsense. They know that they were just going to walk away. Yeah. You know, a lot of them did actually leave, and I mean, they took it upon themselves. I suppose they could leave it up to them. Ultimately, if you think about it from the US perspective, they're saying, listen, so they probably disarmed most of the 300,000 so-called Afghan army. Even if I don't even think it was 300,000, it's like a dodgy figure. Like in terms of actual effective military personnel, probably not true. There was maybe 50 or 60 of them. Not
a shot was fired though.
Yeah, 50 or 60 of them actually flew planes, different types of dodgy planes. Remember, they weren't flying any F-22s or any Raptors or F-16s. Even they were flying like kind of trainer planes and small, like rusting old fighter jets and helicopters and stuff. Flew them over into Uzbekistan, about 50 or so, and that was it. And of course, you can't keep track of everything, you know what I mean? So there's a few bits and pieces left behind, and those guys just decided they wanted to get out of there. They didn't. It was up to each individual to decide how they were going to look. Were they going to blend back into society, take off their military fatigues, and blend back into society? They were going to join the Taliban, or what were they going to do? How were they going to be looked at by the Taliban? Some of them, obviously, you're talking about a lot of people, and each makes their own decision as to whether or not they're going to want to stay around. And some of them left.
So, when Joe Biden is saying in July to reporters, no, this is absolutely not going to be a Saigon moment. And part of his defense against what even CNN reporters could see, the writing on the wall, was that, no, there's a 300,000 strong, probably inflated figure of Afghan National Army. They're well-trained, well-equipped.
To do what? Fight the Taliban? So he was leaving them to fight the Taliban?
Why did Joe Biden et al. Set up that this... Did they unwillingly exacerbate the momentousness of what took place last week because they completely held the line on an information reality right up until the footage was coming in last Sunday? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He lied. He knew better. But then this week he looks like he...
Again, you have to remember the only thing that looked bad was all of those people at Kabul Airport. All of the footage you're seeing is people at Kabul Airport.
Well, there's also the fact that what he was boasting was that, no, the regime isn't about to fall. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, he said that in July.
Yeah.
It's not about to fall. It's not going to happen. There's going to be some kind of orderly transition. What is that? Orderly transition to what? Look at the terms of the agreement. It's an orderly transition to the Taliban taking control of the country. So in that situation, what do those so-called supposed 300,000 Afghan troops that are basically part of a puppet regime, what do? Do they fight the Taliban?
Well, they didn't.
Did they join them?
At all.
Well, but in that situation, was Joe Biden saying that He didn't explain it, but what was the narrative there?
What was implied was that the Taliban are evil and that they would fight to
That
defend
they
their
would
homeland
fight to defend this government that
against
the US
this
had set
terror
up
scourge.
for them. Yeah, well, apparently
But
not.
that narrative wouldn't fly in
No, and I don't
Afghanistan.
think- I think
and
they
anyone
knew
worth
that
of
wasn't
salt
it.
has to know that.
And I think except Joe Biden isn't worth his salt. And Joe Biden is the president who knows very little. He knows very little in general. He knows a bit about corn pop, and if kids sitting on his lap and stroking his legs in a pool and stuff,
Don't bring that up.
and about challenging people to do push-ups and stuff. But that's about it. And in terms of what's going on in the world and foreign policy and stuff, he knows even less. He's not part of the loop. Like, you can imagine someone like Joe Biden who really can't string a sentence together may have some kind of, early stage dementia. You imagine an intelligence briefing with that guy? Imagine sitting down and trying to tell him what's going on. Would you even bother? It's got so bad that, it's always been the case that the White House and the president were largely ceremonial roles. At least in previous times, though, you had a president who could actually understand what you were saying and get it together and stay on script and repeat it properly. But he may well have been told what was likely to happen. But Joe had his own ideas about it. He had his own kind of fuzzy brain thoughts about it. And so when it comes to Joe Biden, all bets are off. He doesn't really, it's a bad idea.
I've heard some people suggesting that. The former or current CIA people were saying stuff this week that we were telling. No, that's not what we were telling him. Last month we're saying it's happening. It's happening now, and he would. Well, I don't know.
And I just want to put out there as well, just
TVs here.
on the comment about that I made, which is absolutely true, about the White House, generally speaking, knowing very little of what goes on of any real importance. It's a spokesperson's house. It's the president is the ceremonial leader and just says what he provides the appearance of a hierarchy and the representative of people and stuff, but hasn't been the case for a very long time. Except it could have been something like that, though. There's an attempt to make it what it claims to be, the White House, which is the house of the commander-in-chief who makes the decisions and leads the country and actually directs policy, domestic and foreign. That happened under Trump. Trump, fool that he was, decided that it says that I'm in commander-in-chief and I make decisions, so I'm going to go ahead and make decisions. I'm going to take your advice from the different agencies, but if I don't like it, I'm going to ignore it and carry on. And then that, in a nutshell, is the explanation for what everybody thinks about Trump. Or what, not everybody, but what the media, let's say, how they presented Trump over the 4 years of his administration was primarily because he decided to do the unthinkable, which is for a president of America, which is to actually take some control and implement policies again. And particularly if they're against, you don't get to implement them anyway, but by trying to implement any policy, you almost by definition be going against of your own policy, be going against the policies of the Washington establishment. But Trump's policies were very definitely against the agenda of the Washington establishment, and that's why he turned into a pariah. And unfortunately, the people of the world, dupes that they are, many of them were led down the path of believing that Trump was some kind of a dictator and that he was a bad man, and that's why you had all these memes. It's almost like going down the memory hole now with Trump. The memes and stuff. The Trump era is almost like it's only like 6, 8, 9 months, but already it's kind of like old history and stuff. But the memes about him being that they come up with very quickly of Orange Man bad. That was the message being put out to the world's population. This guy's bad. Yeah. Why? He's just bad. Look at him. Of course he had some personality quirks that played into that, but the real reason he was bad was because he tried to be the president, the actual president of a country, and do stuff. And that's a no-no. And the problem now is we have a different type of president where, in theory, Biden would be a good puppet, except he can't keep his shit together. He can't keep a straight thought together, and he's a liability in that respect. But in terms of the demonization of him and even CNN turning on him and people thinking, is he going to be impeached or are they going to try and get rid of him or whatever? The point is, the way it unfolded in Kabul at the airport and that really bad optics around that whole situation, so they can't get away with like whitewashing that. They have to blame someone for the way that whole situation looked. So you blame. That's what the president's for. It's a privileged position. He gets lots of perks, but he gets to, he gets to be he gets to transmit the messages of the Washington establishment, what they think. He tells the American population as if they were his ideas. But when things go bad, you get it as well. You're kind of like the defense, essentially, for the establishment, the president. If things go wrong, you will take a lot of heat, and if necessary, we will boot you in order to protect ourselves. Pretty simple.
Yeah. The former CIA director, Panetta, probably put that on a fine point when he said that this was Biden's Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
And reminded the president via his interview on Fox News that when the Bay of Pigs occurred under JFK's watch, he took responsibility for it, even though it was dumped on his lap by the CIA, with a view to forcing him to declare war on Cuba, which he refused. So, yeah, I get
that
that.
analogy only goes so far. Obviously,
Yes.
Panetta isn't going to be hinting anything.
This is exiting a war, not getting into one.
Yeah, and Panetta's not the kind of guy to drop truth bombs, right? So he's using the official narrative of the Bay of Pigs, which is that it was a mistake by the president, and the president has to take the heat for his mistake.
No.
Panetta's not
Two narratives explained in this book.
Panetta's not alluding to that narrative, which is the CIA basically set up the president. There's no CIA or deep state or Washington establishment setting up a Biden here. It was simply a foobar that they couldn't. It was reckless and it's arrogant and all that kind of stuff, and they should have factored in that idea that you would have crowds of people massing on Kabul Airport and desperately trying to get on planes because of, for lots of different reasons, but primarily because you were there for 20 years. They didn't factor that in, and it went pear-shaped. But it's just arrogance, the arrogant empire.
We mentioned at the beginning of the show that the UK Parliament convened, like, packed house, and almost unanimously voted to find the American president in contempt, and specifically over his denigration of the Afghan National Army.
Yeah.
So they all acted surprised that this happened as fast as it did.
How did he denigrate the Afghan National Army?
Because he suggested that they just gave up their weapons and their positions and their uniforms to the Taliban, which they did. So the British Parliament finds
him in contempt for telling the truth.
Is finding reality in contempt.
Right.
And
because the Brits
because he's the commander in chief and the book stops with him, they're projecting that onto it's his fault.
Yeah.
But then similarly, so Tony Blair is, you would agree, he's a very connected man.
He's the devil incarnate as well.
He's the devil incarnate. How does the devil incarnate launch a furious attack on Joe Biden's, quote, imbecilic withdrawal from Afghanistan? What does he find imbecilic? He finds the act of leaving imbecilic. But like you said, it's been no secret for 18 months that this was going to happen. What's he getting at?
It's kind of grandstanding and virtue
He's
signaling.
grandstanding based on the scenes that we've seen.
He's virtue signaling, yeah. And of course he loves a good bit of war, and he's the kind of guy who, like, he was instrumental in the launching of the war on terror after 9/11, the invasion of Iraq, the slaughter of Iraqis, the invasion of Afghanistan, the slaughter of Afghanis, the occupation of those two countries. Tony Blair was front and center in all of that. So it's no surprise that he would want to say, let's stay forever, because I like war. I like domination and control, and it's his pet project. Tony Blair's a guy who's been hanging around forever, trying to kind of stay relevant, and his only relevancy is that he's a warmonger. So he's finding it hard to find relevancy with that as his, as his calling card. Hi, I'm Tony Blair. I have blood in my hands. Can I still be relevant? No, but he does a good job. He finds some traction with some people,
So these Western elites are upset by the optics. They're not upset by the act of leaving.
No,
and ceding influence in Eurasia.
No,
that they understand.
Yeah, of course. And the Chinese and the Russians and stuff have explicitly said that now that the Americans are out of there, we can get on with the business of, stabilizing the entire region, incorporating Afghanistan into the region, and stabilizing the government there, and doing some good business together and all that kind of stuff. So the Americans obviously know that, and they've basically given up. The Americans have given up on their imperial designs, basically. They figure that they've delayed it, like we said in the show last week, they've delayed it for 20 years, delayed it long enough to the point that there's a new agenda in a certain sense. And that's one thing that I would go as far to suggest, although we'll have to wait and see how it pans out, but that this leaving of Afghanistan marks an end to traditional American imperial designs in the world, because this is the center of the world. You have to remember, Afghanistan is effectively, it's called the center of the world, and it's almost exactly the opposite side of the world from where the US is, and it's geopolitically has been for hundreds of years extremely strategic in terms of the great games that the empires played and all that kind of stuff. So for the US to be withdrawing from there, and they've already more or less gone from Iraq and Syria, they have a few bits and pieces hanging on, but the whole thing there is settling down into a new reality. And for them, Afghanistan was the last kind of
frontier outpost.
Yeah, and now that that's done, it does definitely, I mean, I can see how it would look, and probably is a marker in some respect. Now, we talked last week about how we were using the reference of Northern Ireland, where we had that screenshot from the book about the testimony of people on both sides of the conflict in Northern Ireland, talking to someone in the State Department during the peace process in the mid-90s, where he was told, these politicians in Northern Ireland were told that, listen, peace is going to happen in Northern Ireland because we have a new agenda coming up, which is the war on Islamic terrorism. And this was 1995, 6 years before.
He didn't quite say that,
1994.
but he did say
The war on Islamic
the
something.
rise in Islamic fundamentalism.
Right.
That's where we're sewing up the exchequer, i.e. we're
Right.
redirecting resources to something
But
much bigger.
It became very quickly the war on Islamic
War,
terrorism,
yeah.
so that's obviously what he was referring to, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about a war. So they were wrapping up the exchequer, the British exchequer, wrapping up British troop involvement in Northern Ireland and military expenditure in Northern Ireland in order to redeploy it to the war on terror, war on Islamic terrorism in 2001, after 9/11, that galvanizing event. Now, I think it's reasonable enough, it's speculative, but it's reasonable enough to suggest that this may be another wrapping up in the same way, a wrapping up in a bigger way of this last period that we've been in over the past 20, 25 years of the war on Islamic terrorism in America spreading its largesse around the world. That's being wrapped up and has been wrapping up over a number of years, but Afghanistan is a definitive closing, let's say, a marker closing of that period. And the question then arises, in anticipation of what? Because the last time they wrapped up something on a smaller scale in Northern Ireland, it was
To go massive.
for a new stage, a new era that's lasted 20 years. Now they're wrapping it up in Afghanistan for a new era of what? We don't know. Peace and prosperity, maybe, or just the new COVID era.
Lockdowns.
A new era of rolling global lockdowns and a focus on the population and the people, members of or sections of the population that may be resistant to those kind of restrictions on their freedoms. Is that what is coming next? Is that a new era? Or is it something else? I mean, because if you tie the whole COVID business, it's still early days, I suppose, but you let it go on a bit for much longer, and you can imagine that there might be some significant economic issues. You might reach a tipping point from an economic point of view where things might go a bit pear-shaped with the global economy. And if they get bad enough, well then for sure in America and in other countries around the world, but obviously in this case in America, bringing troops back home, wrapping up overseas adventures in order for redeployment back home in the event of some kind of an economic foobar. Because if you do have an economic crash and an economic crisis that is unprecedented in modern history, in a country like America, obviously other countries as well, but in a country like America, 320 million people, how many troops do they have? How many troops is that?
Standing army,
Million?
2 million.
2 million? How many,
I think,
how many soldiers is
plus
that?
the
How
National
many
Guard.
soldiers is that per person? One for every 170, 60 or something. You know,
That's
You need a
but
lot.
that's
You need a lot of
the-
military resources to
The
deal
US
with
is unique, though.
domestic crisis.
What about other countries? France doesn't have anywhere near enough soldiers.
No,
Germany, absolutely not.
no. But yeah,
So
that's all. That's all just speculation. But definitely, I think
Yeah,
the
but
point. The
this
point that
is-
we're making is that it's a marker event. It's a change. It looks like the end of an era, basically.
the end of an era.
And what's coming next, don't know.
Is it the end of the road for reality creation, in the sense of that infamous quote from 2004? I mean, I have it here. It's believed to be Karl Rove, right? Talking to Ron Suskind, New York Times reporter in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, "We're an empire now. When we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do."
Mm.
What is there a strategic gambit at play here? How does the US, after 70 years of doing what it's doing, just retreat like that? Are we overly paranoid and looking for what's the hidden motive?
Well, it could be positive. It could be a good thing. We have peace and prosperity for a while at least, or it could be something that they're preparing for something. And that's what I'm saying. It's speculative, and we don't really know what's coming down. But it's definitely the end of an era. And as we've seen in the past, one era leads into a new era. What era? If you're sitting here right now and looking at the current climate in the globe and what's going on, what era do you think, or would you imagine that we're going into? It's a bit dystopian, no?
Yeah. Police states.
It's a fair enough guess,
Arrest like in Australia last week.
It's only a police state for some people, though, and maybe only for a minority of the population. There's an awful lot of people out there who don't mind what's going on, who are quite happy with it, who are passive. I mean, of course, they have an eye to it. It'll be over at some point, but still, they're not really. In Australia, you talk about Australia being. Australia is right now in another. Australia is like back last April and May right now. Remember what it was like April and May? Going out 1 hour a day for shopping, exercising within 5 kilometers or 1 kilometer, whatever it was of your house. No going over to anybody else's houses. All non-essential.
Don't talk to your
clothes.
neighbours.
Don't talk to your neighbours. Now drinking.
This is the country that gave us neighbours.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, ironic. And so it's basically back right now. It's back in April, May last year. What the rest of us were experiencing in April and May last year. So it's pretty rough, like for it to be going on, because they experienced it in April and May last year as well. So it's like rehashing it. So you can imagine how people are pissed off with it, because people are expecting this thing to be alleviated as time progresses, get better and better. But when they put you back to square one after 18 months, it's a bit annoying, at least for some people. A lot of people feel secure beneath the watchful eyes, as that phrase. And again, that's like, the fact that I can say that's true. There's a lot of people, the sentiment they have of these extreme restrictions on their freedoms and extreme control by the government, they feel, that's a good phrase to use, they feel secure beneath the watchful eyes. Now, that term, secure beneath the watchful eyes, was a campaign that was ongoing for years and may still be on London transport. All London transport, buses, trains, tube, whatever, metro, on the billboards and stuff all across the transport sector, they had this sign with an eye on it, and it said secure beneath the watchful eyes. And that was related directly to terror attacks and bombings in London, particularly, for example, in 2007, the London tube and bus bombings, to reassure people. So, for me, there's a link, there's a segue between the way people have been conditioned through terrorism and terror attacks on Western soil in particular, but around the world through the media, highlighted to everybody of the threat from Islamic terrorism. And here we're talking about Islamic terrorism again. The conditioning of people through that fear-based, it was direct, blunt instruments. It was like attacking people. A lot of people died or killed, and most other people were traumatized to one extent or another by it. And that's been going on since 9/11 and increased over the years up until 2000. kind of, what was it, 16, 17, 18, well, the last one was maybe 2018, 19. And then it just all went away. And a lot of people said that, since COVID came along, it seems the jihadis, the jihadis who know no fear and are willing to blow themselves up, were suddenly afraid of COVID because terror attacks pretty much came to a halt as soon as COVID appeared.
Yeah.
And it's the same fear-based programming. Basically.
Even in Syria.
I mean, the core between the two, the link between terrorism and COVID, in terms of how it's affecting the population, is that it confronts people in a very brutal and blunt way with their own death. And it instills in them a fear of their own mortality. And you can't go any further than that. That's your trump card. If you're aiming to control a population through fear, then your trump card is you can talk about all sorts of other threats with climate change, this, that, the other, bears, I don't know, murder hornets, whatever you want. But when it's you, citizen, are in mortal danger, and here's examples of it, and here's other people dying in the way that you might die, well, that's it. You don't have anywhere, you've nowhere else to go. You've gone as far as you can go in terms of state control of the population through fear. And you better hope it works. If that's your agenda, you better hope it works, because you don't have anything else to use. And if people get used to it and overcome their fear of their own death, well, then you're in trouble. But some people will never overcome the fear of their own death. And some people will always want mommy and daddy government to take care of them in as coddled a way as possible, really, There's loads of stuff. You can read it on Twitter, read it in articles and stuff, people saying explicitly, kind of miss lockdowns. And it's, that's a problem. For me, that's a problem. When I see me and other people, us here, and other people, a lot of other people around the world who are very much against lockdowns and don't want, and like my mom, like I mentioned last time, that her and many other people like her feel that they've been harmed by lockdowns, psychologically, emotionally harmed by the lockdown process. And then you have other people who say they miss it. How are you going to reconcile those two people? Those types of people? How are you going to get those two types of people, very different types of people, to see eye to eye on this issue? And there's a fundamental difference in those two kinds of people, I would argue. I mean, it seems clear to me there's a very fundamental difference. You have to get into some kind of esoteric or spiritual treatise on it or something to really try and explain it, because it is very, very fundamental, that different response to reality, where someone needs, the overbearing, overweening, and welcomes the overbearing and overweening control of government, of an authority in their lives, and other people who say, get the hell away from me, stay out of my life, I don't want anything, leave me alone, They're two different species almost,
Yeah, effectively. I don't know how we're going to get through all the items we have. Maybe, Scotty, if we can just go from left to right and see what we got. See if it... Well, this is Biden's interview. Do we even I think we covered it. Go to the
That was
next.
4 or 5 days ago.
Oops.
No, let's not bother.
Yeah, Islamic State attack. That's probably not true. It's they did fund some radical jihadi types in Afghanistan to do their bidding. This one, on COVID, this is Montagnier. He's actually the guy, he won a Nobel Prize in 2008 or something for the discovery of HIV. No, go scroll down. Oh, not too far. Recipient of 2008 Nobel Prize in this for discovery of the human. Okay, discovered HIV. So he's no slouch. Basically, he knows what he's talking about, and he's basically said before now, I think, but this is just maybe a repeating of it. He's repeating it that vaccines don't stop the virus. They feed the virus and facilitate its development into stronger and more transmittable variants. Yeah, that's true. That's, decades of immunology and virology has shown that to be the case, that when you challenge a virus, if you try to kind of targeted and to wipe it out, strongly go after it with these kind of vaccines, but that they're not, it's not a wipeout. They're not effective enough to actually kill it. What all you do is you provoke it to, almost from a survival instinct point of view, you provoke it to, I'm not saying it's conscious, but that you provoke it to mutate. So the mutations that are happening that are making the vaccines no longer effective, and in Israel they're down to 15%. The Pfizer
Really?
vaccine is down to 15% efficiency after several months. I.e., that's why they're talking about booster shots. They're already giving a third booster shot but that one within a few months, it's down to 15%, pretty much no good anymore. We need another one 4 or 5 months later. So then every 6 months, booster shot forever. And at what point? By taking more and more booster shots, you're drastically increasing your chances of having an adverse effect, an adverse reaction to the vaccine.
Yeah.
People were willing to take the vaccine and risk the adverse event, the adverse reaction, because it's just a one-off or a 2-shot vaccine done. Okay, I'm fine now. No, every 6 months, another one. Well, especially if you're vulnerable or you're in any kind of a, not necessarily that you're, in bad health, but if you're elderly or whatever, even in good health, you may well be, you're increasing your chances that at some point you're going to be one of those people who has an adverse reaction to it, and it could be a very bad adverse reaction to it. Did you see the picture? I should have put it up here. In Australia, the minister for, I don't know, beer or something, minister for Barbies and shrimps on the Barbie, some minister in the Australian government, a couple of months ago got his Pfizer vaccine. Yeah, on his Instagram, just got my Pfizer vaccine. Awesome. And then just a couple of days ago, he said, he posted on Twitter saying, people in my press conference the other day, people noticed that I was, my eye was kind of like not working. It was dropping. He says, I've come down with Bell's palsy, which is a kind of paralysis of the face. That's a known adverse effect from vaccines. So a few months ago, he's like, big up and everybody get the vaccine, it's awesome. A couple of months later, he's on TV and he's got this floppy, droopy eye that isn't working, and he has to admit on Twitter that he doesn't say explicitly that he got it from the vaccine, but it's like, duh, everybody knows it. Your chance of getting Bell's palsy, given that you're a healthy person, is extremely low. You get a vaccine and it's a known side effect of a vaccine, the vaccine give you Bell's palsy. Sure, you might recover from it, a lot of people do, but still, pretty humiliating,
Yeah.
But so that's the example of a kind of adverse reaction. That's one of many adverse reactions you can get from vaccines. And I'm saying, sure, you can take the chance when you just get a 1 or 2 shots, and then you're done. Vast majority of people won't have any significant adverse reaction. But if they're talking about booster shots for every 6 months, so 2 more a year, ongoing every year, because you keep on doing it, you're continuing to drive mutations. By trying to wipe out this virus in this ridiculous harebrained scheme to kind of like wipe it out completely, when that's not what happens. Did they wipe out the flu? Anybody ever want to wipe out the flu?
Bill Gates.
Yeah, but has it ever happened?
He still wants to.
Yeah, you can if you want, but well, you can take a freaking short walk off along pier for all I'm. Don't get me started on Bill Gates, or I'll be.
It's a fish sound. He gets the fish.
We need a Bill Gates mannequin here so I can batter the hell out of it.
Whoa, get easy. Stop. That's enough slaps.
He's dead already, Scotty. He's dead. So, the point is, it's a ridiculous idea to try and completely wipe out a virus like this, a respiratory virus like this. Nobody has really taken it seriously before, but now for some reason, they're moving and have been from the get-go moving in the direction of attempting to wipe it out completely. Zero COVID, the term zero COVID. We have to have zero COVID. And the more you try to get zero COVID, the more mutations you provoke and the longer it continues. And is that the agenda then, the longer it continues? Because a lot of people in power having a very good time wielding that power, the massive increase in power they've had over the population over this 18 months. So is that an agenda? Well, there's also Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, all the people who make the vaccines. They're like raking it in. They're like, just go and look at the share price. Look at the share price of Moderna or Pfizer or any of the others and look over the past 5 years or the past year, 2 years. Look at how much they've spiked, So, but again, there's a problem. In the same way as America around the world, whenever it spreads its military around the world, it can only ever be for freedom and democracy. There's no financial interest whatsoever. There's no selfish interest in the American government or the military doing anything around the world. It's all altruistic. It's for freedom and democracy. And in the case of the vaccine makers, it's only for public health. They have no interest in their stock price or the massive amounts of money from the public purse that they're getting from having this captive captive market of 8 billion people potentially that they can force a vaccine on through fear, and then continue to give them vaccines in perpetuity. The amount of money that they would make from that is of no consideration in this process whatsoever. Remember that. Everybody should remember that money does not matter to people at all, especially people in positions of power who like money a lot. They really don't like money. They only like your public health, and that's all they're interested in. Just like Fauci, Biden, all the rest. You know, this is why I need a bigger fish to slap a lot of people at once. Because that is a narrative, although they don't express it explicitly like that, that is clearly the narrative that's going through people's heads. That they have this ridiculously childish view of the world and other people. Stuff they ascribe to other people. They ascribe selfishness to the other people, to their neighbour. That bloody neighbour of mine, he's a selfish bastard. He's always trying to get money out of me. They know that that's part of human nature. Put that person in a position of power over them. No, he's perfect now. He would never do that.
Yeah.
How can you run a world like that? How can you run a human society with people who are so stupid?
Yeah.
Who are so ignorant?
It's a blind spot.
It's not just a blind spot, but I mean, yeah, and they can get away with it in normal times, but in bad times, that blind spot becomes a deadly blind spot. It's dangerous, not just to them, but to everybody else in society that has to kind of go along with them or is pulled along with them and their ridiculous, naive allegiance to people in positions of power and denial of the simple idea that people in positions of power would have any selfish interest whatsoever. I need a wall, you know, to bang my head against. I don't need a fish anymore. I need a wall that I can just like, and a head banging noise that I can just, fish is no good. I need like, boom. Anyway.
It's a good thing this show title and blurb says nothing about COVID. YouTube was perfectly happy with us discussing last
Afghanistan,
week.
yes. And beating up on Biden, yeah. Well, we're like the mainstream media, right? They all beat up on Biden. Even CNN having a go at Biden. You're allowed to do that.
Can I go back to that a second?
Go. I don't care.
Surely.
Whatever.
Surely they
You want to go to Biden, you mean?
No.
Afghanistan.
It's worse than that. This blind spot, the projection onto authority to look after us, safe under the watchful eyes. It's critical that in our current configuration of things, it's critical that the US president, especially one that's keeping out that other guy, Orange Man Bad, is upheld as the moral arbiter of right and wrong, of forget who gets to live and who gets to die, emperor style.
Yeah. And he's competent.
And
He has
he's
to be competent.
But
you picked the wrong person, Joe Biden, yeah. What about Kamala?
well, we had someone here, a comment from a viewer. The question is why the media covered all the people at Kabul Airport. They could easily have ignored it, but they didn't, and they've humiliated Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the commentaries in The Economist, in the Financial Times, they said this is a massive hit against America's moral standing in the world and the standing of the West.
Yeah.
They talk about the fear of chaos and lockdowns are needed to control the virus, right? We know it's probably analogous for control of people and the behavior, especially if we're going into topsy-turvy times where potential for economic upheaval,
Yep.
climate migration, for real, not like in a fake sense. Why are they undercutting their own core narrative that requires a stability for their own positions in power? I mean, what's been presented to people in the last week is the question in their heads is, what do we need government for? Or at the very least, short of that, we need to get rid of this one. Trump was emboldened enough to tweet or put out a formal statement that got tweeted because he's banned on Twitter, that this guy needs to be impeached. And he had a lot of support across the board. People wondering, like, among Democrat base, you know, this is bad. This is really bad. We need to do something. You know?
Yeah. Why are they undermining it? Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't be sure. It could be just the whole thing falling apart because the whole edifice is corrupt and it's falling under its own weight because they're telling so many lies that it's not sustainable in a general sense. But
everyone's feeling truthy or acknowledging the truth.
Well, also, I mean, you can't. I don't think it'd be possible to. There's not such control where you could censor events in Kabul, right? There's gonna be someone. I mean, they don't necessarily have control over the Chinese press or the Russian press. They're gonna put it out there, and then so it's gonna get on with social media. It's gonna get out onto the Twitter sphere and on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So then the media looks remiss. The Western media, if it just ignores it all, they're gonna like, why are you ignoring this? It starts to look worse for them. So they have to cover it. And when you're given a really horrible situation that looks really bad and it's really graphic in the sense of people falling off the side of planes, off the side of American planes, American military planes that were there to bring freedom and democracy, without a parachute apparently, how do you spin that to the good? Like, you can't. So you have to maintain some credibility. You have to actually report on it as it actually is, right?
Biden gave him an out. One of his statements this week was that, look, he got truthy. He said, look, we were always going to get out. We had to get out. 20 years is too long.
Who gave him an out?
Biden gave
the media an out.
The intelligentsia an out. As in, come with me on this messaging.
Yeah.
Of course we were going to leave. We all agreed we shouldn't have been there in the first place. It's a mistake. It's too costly. It's costing American lives.
But that doesn't fit with the American narrative of why they were there and what they were doing, spreading freedom and democracy and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? The bottom line is, like, they were there to protect the Afghan people, right? To bring freedom and democracy to the Afghan people. And in the end, they up and leave. And you have all these people, Afghan people, saying, we want freedom and democracy. And America just leaves and says, sorry. And the ones hanging onto the plane fall off. And nobody gets freedom and democracy. I mean, it's like, it undermines the whole narrative is the thing. So you got to report on it and try and spin it. And I think, CNN, they were bashing Biden, but they were still fairly, they came from it's a very low bar for them, if you know what I mean, in terms of how they generally report on anybody, any White House that they support. They don't have to try too hard to look like they're bashing the president. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think certainly it wasn't. They weren't spelling it out in the way that it actually was. You know what I mean? In terms of the full truth of the situation. None of them went into the history or explained. Obviously they're not going to explain that America was there for imperial reasons and they were never interested in freedom and democracy in the same way they were never interested in freedom and democracy in Iraq. It's all one big racket, and that the people who suffered as a result of it were the Afghanis that they were supposedly, protecting, and the Iraqis and the Syrians. You know what I mean? You're not going to get the media to do that. That would be a kind of more complete truth-telling of it. For them just to kind of like criticize Biden a little bit is really letting him off lightly in context. You know what I mean?
Right.
From what it could be, But, they had to report on it, is the answer to that question. They couldn't have just ignored it. They don't own all of the media in the world, do you know what I mean? And it would have clearly got out, do you know what I mean? Unless you're talking, you have to go into some global conspiracy then to clamp down.
Western media is overwhelmingly dominant.
Yeah, but you don't think China and
Anglophone
Russia
media
would have taken the opportunity to make America look bad? Or the Iranian press, they would have jumped on it and would have had RT correspondents down there and Chinese daily correspondents down there and putting it up on their Twitter feeds.
Uh-huh.
And then CNN is like, shh. It's like, CNN, did you see that video? Are you not even there? Why aren't you there? You're part of the American troop withdrawal. Are you not reporting on this? Are you denying? Is this censorship? Are you like, you know what I mean? You can see how they have to report on those things. You know what I mean? In the current, techno world where stuff gets spread around the world and in seconds everybody gets to know what's going on. But there's some good news from the Toronto Sun, Scotty. If you can The first word is burial. I know that doesn't sound like good news. From the, it's a little red icon. Yeah, burial costs for Canadians killed by approved vaccines. Covered. Sorry, burial costs covered. So, yeah, this is good news that the Canadian government has decided that they won't force the people who they forced a vaccine on and then died. They won't force their family members to pay for the burial.
Yeah, but good luck getting a doctor to say it was the vaccine.
Yeah, but the ones that do, at least the Canadian government is stepping up and saying, you know what, that vaccine that killed your loved one that we forced him to take, we manipulated him to take, we're gonna pony up the funds for the burial. I mean, it'll be a basic casket, right? Won't pay for the gold lined one, but the gold plated one.
That's a bribe in place of a criminal trial,
Yeah,
basically.
they're heroes. Those people who died from taking the vaccine are heroes. They're martyrs to the cause of public health. They did the right thing, and they may have saved, who knows how many they saved.
Trillions.
Trillions of people.
Well, yeah, they'll say they saved generations of humanity for 1,000 years to come.
They should erect statues to them.
That's coming.
save
Wait
yourself
till you
it.
see it. It's Fauci statue.
Yeah. More good news. Actual good news in a way this time. Jerusalem Post. There's not much good comes out of Israel these days, but certainly not right now when the Israelis are shooting Palestinians as we speak. But look it up in case you missed that one. But Jerusalem Post, it really says COVID-19 could be treated for under $1 a day. That's a lot cheaper than a coffin, no? And it's not through the vaccine, because vaccines are way more than $1 a day. It's in the picture, ivermectin.
Ah, they discovered
A
it.
40-year-old parasitic, anti-malarial, and other things that's been used by hundreds of millions of people around the world over the past 40 years. It's on the World Health Organization's essential medication list. And it's over the past 18 months, it's been roundly condemned by Fauci and everybody else as some kind of a death pill or something if you take it, despite the fact that, you know, pretty much nobody's ever died from taking it, and it's been very effective. So anyway, this study in Israel, and it goes from, if you scroll down, double-blind study between May 15th last year through the end of January this year. Doesn't say, I think it might say further on down how many were in the study, but it's a fairly sizable study, and pretty much it's effective. 89 eligible volunteers over the age of 18 who all were diagnosed with coronavirus, and they were given, half of them were given ivermectin, half of them were given a placebo, and the ones who got ivermectin had a much faster recovery time and less severe effects from COVID. But that pill, and that's just one study, and there's been several other studies done showing that ivermectin is very effective. It's certainly something that you would give to people where you had no other option, but, you know, maybe, I don't know, you know, just sending them home to try and figure it out themselves. Why not give it to them? But ivermectin has been roundly condemned because of just pure propaganda coming probably ultimately directly from the vaccine manufacturers, because it's a direct challenge to the vaccines that, you don't, if you start coming down with COVID symptoms, take some ivermectin. You've got a good chance of getting over it very quickly within a few days, and it's all good. Don't need a vaccine.
Isn't that a little weird? Because that article says nearly 89 people, half of them got a placebo, half of them got ivermectin for. Nearly 72% of volunteers treated with ivermectin tested negative for the virus by day 6.
Yep.
In contrast, only 50% of those who received the placebo tested negative.
Yep.
So of those 89 people, half of them were given a sugar pill, and they still tested negative after 6 days.
Well, yeah. But that shows you that people have an immune system. That's the other aspect that we're talking about here.
That makes the article worse.
Yeah, well, you're not
Because
allowed
it's
to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that people have immune systems, and that immune systems. Although we did talk about it previously, the fact that immunity. There's a lot of information and data coming out now that immunity, natural immunity to COVID, is significantly better than the immunity you get from from the jab.
Somebody's guilty
bottom line
of
is-
medical misinformation because the FDA this week said anyone who thinks taking ivermectin, which is for horses only, they said, is stupid.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's not for horses. I saw that
So-
on Twitter as well. It's not for horses only. Go and look it up on Wikipedia. It's for malaria, and it's been used for 40 years in hundreds of millions of people. I mean, the level of whatever, it's just bullshit. Horse. I see somebody saying, "What are you taking horse medicine for?" Dude, go and look up Wikipedia if you trust Wikipedia, or look up anywhere else. I mean, the level of discourse around this is like less than infantile. It's ridiculous. It's like, I don't blow up the internet,
Well, it's spawned by
except this show.
misinformation from medical authorities, which is
Right.
what gets this show banned from
Right,
YouTube because we're in dispute
Yeah.
with X authority when Y and Z authorities are saying what
Right.
we're saying.
And it comes from medical misinformation from authorities transmitted to the people who haven't two brain cells to rub between, to rub together, and all they do is spout medical information from the authorities as though it's authoritative. When all they have to do is just check. But there's this resistance among a lot of people to doing one tiny bit of their own research. So many people, they're just waiting. Like, it goes back to the thing about people needing authority in their lives and just totally dependent on it. And all they want to do is hear what comes down the tube, down through the internet, or down wherever they get their news from authorities. They only listen to authoritative sources, and whatever the authorities say, they believe and they repeat to you. And they think that's an argument. I think that's part of the debate. It's not part of the debate.
Yeah.
You repeating what someone else said is not part of the debate. You thinking for yourself and coming up with your own ideas about things, that's part of a debate. Being a mouthpiece for Tony Fauci is not, you can leave the room.
And the worst part is they don't remember that what they're saying is what Fauci said to them this week, but what they're saying next week is different.
Yeah.
Because that's what Fauci said this week.
Yeah.
And there's no recall at all
Right.
of a distance between the two things. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's shoot through some tabs. I want some diversity.
After you, Scott,
Just shoot through them all at warp speed there, Mr. Scott. Half impulse power.
this happened in France. So the French COVID pass is kicking in. Initially, they said you could not buy anything in malls and shopping centres without the
that might be
COVID
one.
pass. Then they said actually you can, but now in practice you can't. So they have hired private security at the entrance to shopping malls
He's an enforcer.
to not let anyone without the COVID pass into the premises. It's not ubiquitous across France, but in some malls,
Yeah.
there's more and more videos surfacing like this.
It seems to be spotty in different places.
Yeah. Maybe some companies are piloting it or something. In a couple of other places where this was done, I think people just broke in, and security. Well, if it's only one or two people, they're not going to stand up against the crowd. But here you see it's just one person, so it's all going to depend on whether or not people stand up for someone like that and barge their way in, regardless.
Yep.
Which will give security guy there something to think about
Mm-hmm.
and reconsider his job position.
Yeah.
And if he really wants to find himself basically acting like the government's Taliban against a sea of people who are pissed off. Okay, let's go to the next one. But we mentioned Australia and how bad it is there. Well, there were big protests in Melbourne.
Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah.
Two cities, about 5 million people each. Pretty much, like I said, full lockdown, similar to lockdowns that were imposed in here, in this hemisphere, last April and May. People not happy about it. They had a protest yesterday in Melbourne, right on the border, because I think Melbourne on the border with to New South Wales and Victoria, whatever, and they were because they're told they're not allowed to go between the two states, you know. So
Right.
they were using that as symbolic, kind of like infringing of the guidelines, apart from actually being out, because they weren't allowed to be out, right? You're only allowed out for 1 hour a day to go shopping and
That specific decree is being floated in the United States and Canada. Biden White House last week said that interstate travel between truckers may be checked
Yep.
to see if you've been vaccinated.
Yep.
I swear to God, if they actually start doing that to Americans, no, you can't cross state lines without the passport. That is like
They might. That could
it's
happen.
all going to blow up.
We'll have to wait and see.
Canada
It's-
did likewise at
Yeah.
the same time. And you know what I hate when Trudeau announces this after due consideration with our experts.
Yeah.
We have decided.
Yeah.
No, you didn't. You're all doing likewise.
Yeah, yeah.
Copying other countries
Build
because
back better. Build back better. Yeah, some of them are. Far too many. Far too few, sorry. Not nearly enough.
let's scroll down to some videos in this one.
At the CBD to express
Yeah.
their frustration at this current lockdown.
Yo.
And there you go. We had some protesters there trying to break
And there you
through
go.
the
Those
police
filthy
line.
protesters.
We've got mounted police
Look at
also trying to stop the demonstration from going ahead. So if you remember similar pictures a month ago when there were
Yeah. Horrific
similar
pictures of people
lockdown
exercising
protests,
their
in
civil
Sydney,
liberties.
in Melbourne,
It's just
in Brisbane
terrible.
as well. We are now
Not one of them with an immune system. It's horrible.
Also Australia.
This guy, yeah.
8 months in jail.
8 months in jail for planning to go to a protest or organising a protest. And
I believe he was charged, arrested, and sentenced on the same day.
I can understand him getting 8 months in jail for that haircut, but not for going to a protest. Yeah. Okay, well, next one. Dawn. Is that...
That's last Sunday, but it's an angle they haven't seen before. There are tens of thousands of people on the runway.
Yeah, how do you fly planes out of there?
Well, what they did was they got Black Hawk helicopters too.
Yeah, but you're not going to get them out of the way, basically, so
Yeah,
that
so the plane could roll.
can come in. Yeah, but it's a nightmare. Like that's a
That-
problem for
Whoa.
It's a lot of people.
for that part of your kind of like disengagement from the country, the part where you just take out the contractors and the civilians and stuff. That's a problem. That there are tens of thousands of Afghans who want to go too on the runway. Obviously. Yeah.
So, to recap again, but for this
It all
incident
would've went
last
fine, yeah.
Sunday, CNN,
The problem is that
Tony
people-
Blair, the British Parliament, would all be saying, well, they'd all be on message. There would be a pan-West message.
Which is it
that
all went smoothly.
It went smoothly. We
Yeah.
had to do it. It
Yeah,
was,
had to
its
go.
time had come.
Yeah, for sure. But whenever you got these kind of optics, you got to talk about them, right? You got to maintain the moral high ground and show that you're a responsible, caring politician, right? Everybody has to get in and get their 5 seconds of airtime to say this is terrible. The humanity.
Oh, the humanity.
Anyway, what else we got? Yes, the Mohawk is not approved by me. Biden's presidential scrutiny is never before Afghan chaos. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's just, we mentioned that. That's the CNN coming down pretty hard on Biden.
yeah. So is Trump. You should
Cover
sit
of The
on
Economist last week.
Biden's debacle. Well, Biden's debacle, it continues the narrative that this was actually Biden's decision when, it hides the whole Washington establishment that oversaw this whole situation for the past 18 months. So it's good to have fall guy, though. One guy, dump it all on him, especially if he's an old guy with burgeoning dementia. He's an easy target. So, whipping boy.
This is him countering. Again, he's doubling down on their official July position.
Yeah, well,
General Mark Milley is saying, no. He's saying after the fact, this is a couple of days ago, we had no clue.
he's been to too many boot camps, that guy. There's something wrong with him. Because, I've seen him, Mark Milley, before. He's a guy who is into critical race theory as well. And transgenders in the military. So, think
And he's white supremacist. Well, this may actually be strategically relevant. He
Yeah.
thinks one of the number one problems for the United States is white supremacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's on song. So he's mind programmed. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's Manchurian candidate. So we can just discount him. Next.
Oh, this is iconic.
Yeah, throw that one up there. That's pretty good. Just show us a picture. Yeah, Iwo Jima. Wow, they're good at, I mean,
That was a seriously good troll.
can you imagine ever, like, I mean, that alone says the Taliban are not, and the other trolls they did with Biden, with the ice cream and stuff, them all
Yeah.
eating ice cream and stuff, that alone says to me that the Taliban are not the kind of Taliban that maybe that they were in the past, or that the way the media still kind of presents them, or people still think of
The
them.
sense of humor suggests
When
that
you have a sense of humor like that, you're not really, I mean, of course they're fundy Islamic, kind of types and Sharia law and all that kind of stuff, but they seem to, and that's fair enough, if that's what they're about, and most of the people are willing to go along with it, but they're not ISIS, basically, put it that way, because Taliban are more genuine than ISIS. ISIS was wholly a creation of Saudi Arabia and basically the CIA.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of paid jihadis to overtake Syria. Thankfully, Russia sent them all to the grapes and the
Russia
vir-
did,
the
but
vir- grapes and
the
the virgins.
Americans, Trump is still claiming that he did it.
Yeah, of course he did. Trump claims a lot of things. He did a bit, but not.
Oh, this is, you talk about the Biden and the ice cream.
Yeah.
So that's Taliban fighters in Afghanistan
Yeah.
trolling Biden with ice cream and Saigon type images from Kabul. Check this out. This is somewhere in the States last week. I guess he didn't do it, but he filmed it.
Everybody's talking about this billboard. Want to make sure it wasn't fake. So I'm gonna flip it around and show you.
Zoom, 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 zoom. Oh my god. Somebody paid for that.
And that's it. It rotates with like 7 other ads.
Yeah.
So it's a couple minutes before it comes back.
That's freedom right there, yeah. It's uniquely American.
Oh no, there's one there where he's hiding. Go back. You just go past the Scotty. Further on. He's hiding behind like a Venetian blinds there. Where you been, Joe? Biden been hiding.
Biden been hiding. Yeah. Well, it's good that you can still... well, you can do that in a lot of places, actually, if you want.
Well, in France, you see what the guy who owns a billboard company was doing the last 2 weeks. He's got Macron as Hitler.
As Hitler, yeah. Yeah. Premier Gentleman's Club. I mean, that's where Biden hangs out as well.
So that's the end, yeah.
Widows matter. Okay,
Next.
next one. This is just going through a bunch of stuff here to see what's been in the news this past week.
We won't listen, but this is Lara Logan's on Tucker's show, and she makes the obvious to us case, but news still in official circles, to MSM circles, that hang on a second, what we just saw happen in Afghanistan isn't just circumstance, random happenstance. Rather,
No.
we chose to do this, and we're choosing
Yeah.
the continuing horrible footage we're seeing from Afghanistan. It's our choices,
Yeah.
which
Well, as we discussed, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I think the most rational explanation is that they weren't expecting all of those Afghanis
Right.
to flood the airport and
So that's what's wild.
put it out of.
Yeah.
Because if they knew that was probably going to happen and let it happen, and knew therefore also the result was that it would look very bad for Biden, that implies that someone within the Washington establishment is
Right.
working against Biden, which doesn't really fly.
No.
So sure, they knew what they were doing all the way up to that point, but that was the one wild card. But again, it's just it's not a positive. It's a negative in the sense that it's reckless. They should have expected
yeah.
that large numbers of Afghanis would flood the airport trying to get on planes out of there, And the way that they just up and left super quickly as well, you know what I mean? They were probably too paranoid about it. They could have done it much more transparently where they were over the past 18 months. It could have been
Informing Afghanis
there could have
about
been-
what was coming.
Could have been a lot of Western media reports of the progressive movement of, not in full detail, but the progressive
Expansion of
with
Taliban power in Afghanistan.
but also with the progressive withdrawal
Yeah.
of the American military and civilian infrastructure in Kabul and,
Yeah.
and in what do you call it, in what do you call the airfield?
Bagram Air
Bagram
Base.
Air Base. You know, they could have
There
had
was-
little odd reports on that just to show that it was happening.
It was down to several thousand
Right.
by last week.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, next.
this is the brother of the former president. This is the swearing-in ceremony I mentioned earlier.
The brother is,
That one there getting his head kissed.
he's sworn into the Taliban.
He's joining the Taliban
You
formally.
know what Taliban means? Student,
Yeah.
right? In case anybody doesn't know, Taliban just means student, and it basically comes from they're basically religious seminary students, and they're all the result of a campaign, more or less in the 80s, in the late 70s and 80s, by Saudi Arabia to fund these kind of religious schools in Pakistan and other countries around, where they would bring people from different countries in that area, young impressionable kids, and indoctrinate them into a kind of extremist form of Islam that is practiced in Saudi Arabia. You know, Saudi Arabia, the best buddy of America, where they practice an extreme form of Islam. Well, they've been doing that for the past 50 years maybe, where they would open up and fund these madrasas or religious seminary schools where they'd bring young impressionable kids from Pakistan and from different countries and bring them in order to initially to wage, and this is with connivance and support of the Americans and the CIA, in order to fight against, to create an army, essentially a mujahideen army like most people know about in Afghanistan, not limited to Afghanistan, but in Afghanistan in the context of the Soviet occupation of the country, to fight against them and to kick them out as part of Cold War I. And that's where the Taliban come out of, and also Al-Qaeda came out of that, and Osama bin Laden came out of that. And to a large extent, ISIS is the later incarnation of the same process that's, as I said, 40 years old, of the Saudis, at the behest and with the agreement of the CIA, creating cadres of large numbers of indoctrinated extremist Islamic type fighters who are all basically anti the West and all that kind of stuff. Because the US can then use them, and they did use them. They used them to fight the Soviets in Cold War One, but afterwards they used them as targets in Cold War Two. Cold War Two being post 9/11,
War on Terror, yeah.
which was a geopolitical war. So the war on terror was actually a geopolitical war against Russia and China. And so the people that they had used previously to fight against the Soviets and kick them out of Afghanistan and to control other areas of the world from a Cold War perspective. Because the idea basically was that in these countries where you might have communist or Soviet encroachment in the different areas within the Soviet sphere of influence, it was much better to, the way you controlled that country was by, especially obviously if it's an Islamic country, you increase the Islamicization of it. You know, you basically have, you know, an extremist ideology. It's much better, much easier to control because they're very much, and we're very much anti-commie. Like communism was very distasteful to the extremist Islamic
Because it was
viewpoint.
godless.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so those people were used in that way, created by the Saudis and the CIA and the Pakistani ISI and stuff, for that purpose, to fight the first Cold War. When that ended, the first Cold War ended, then those same people were used as enemies in the war on terror. So you go and bomb them, but they're not really your enemies. You're just using them as an excuse to go and invade countries that you were, fighting at a distance in a certain sense by these proxies. Now you, after post 9/11, you wanted to invade those countries or those regions, and you did justification for it. And the justification for it was the war on terror, and you were fighting war on terror against the people that you had created previously. And the point being that it's not really about fighting war on terror, it's about occupying parts of the world in order to wage Cold War II, which was just an extension of Cold War I. Cold War II, again, against the same previous enemies of Cold War I, which is Russia and China. And it's all about geopolitics and control of the globe. So that's basically the summation of
The last century.
Yeah. Next.
That was pretty much it. There was the Wikipedia.
That's
entry
all the
on
news?
The reality-based community.
Okay. That's all the news that fits to print. And it's actually been, well, we started a bit late, but it's been, well, an hour and 45 minutes. Are people sleeping? Is that enough?
We're done.
There's nothing else to say
Is there anything else to say about Afghanistan?
about the war on terror. No, about Afghanistan.
That's all we have to say about the war in Vietnam. Because, like,
Yeah.
in theory, like, I expect now they're going to bury this. Surely
Yeah,
they're
it'll
going
go
to.
away.
There's too much bad news going on right now. I mean, the United States' reputation is hammered,
Mm-hmm.
just hammered. And it's not just over there, and therefore we're losing influence to Beijing and Moscow.
Yeah.
It's getting hammered at home.
Yeah. It was an interesting. It was
They're going to have to forget this as quickly
yeah.
as
It was
possible.
an interesting diversion from COVID
Yeah, thankfully.
for a week or two, but now it's back to COVID.
Probably.
Because we're going into the winter, at least in the northern hemisphere. We're not going into the winter, but we're coming out of the summer and into the fall. So start
Well-
September. September is like, even if it's still warm in the part of the northern hemisphere where you live, which is like the case for us, it's more or less September still summer. But there seems to be a consensus that once the end of August happens, it doesn't matter if it's still hot and warm and sunny and stuff. It's basically the fall. It's like they say, it's like, right, and obviously the fall is virus season, right? And that's when you start lockdowns. If you're going to do lockdowns, we just saw a rise in cases. Why? Because it's September the 1st. And the virus knows it's September the 1st because September the 1st is the fall. It's autumn time in September. I'm like, all the leaves are still in the trees and it's warm outside. It doesn't matter. The virus comes on September the 1st. That's when kids go back to school and when the summer holidays are over. So virus is coming back, so we need lockdowns.
Stay home, lock your doors.
It's the science. The science says that.
Is that your prediction for
virus has a
the
calendar.
next? What's your
Well-
prediction? What's happening in the next few weeks?
Based on our previous experience, which
lockdowns.
isn't very long, it's only 18 months old, but based on what happened last September, I'm speaking directly from
Well, that
the
only happened
experience
in
of what
late
happens.
October.
Well, they start talking about it in September when
Right.
kids go back to school, kids wearing masks, all that kind of bullshit, you know what I mean? So they really start ramping it up by September. We got to start, hospitals might be a bit overwhelmed coming into the flu season, into the COVID season.
Speaking of countries acting in lockstep, the United States and Canada, and probably other places, also issued end of September as deadline for, say,
Yeah.
all federal employees getting vaccinated, fully jabbed.
or for medical personnel to get jabbed, yeah.
There's some variation in what exactly they're demanding, but September 30th is
Yeah.
like it's become this D-Day.
Yeah. But then you have a build up to that basically, so they start the whole campaign. So basically by the end of August, once the last day of August passes and you're in September, then you start the cycle of bullshit starts starting. And they've set it up in this way, so you'll have a month of September of people ramping up what you just talked about are people gonna get vaccinated, are federal workers gonna get vaccinated? What about the healthcare professionals? Are we gotta push and to get them to do it? What have they done to get people to get vaccinated? Scare them with numbers and deaths and hospitals being overwhelmed. They're going to, if they have a deadline of September 30th to get a bunch of people who aren't being vaccinated, to be sure through all of September they're going to increase
So can
that.
we then boycott the news for September and just skip to the good parts, the good bit after?
You can, yeah,
You can.
yeah.
Right.
Or we can talk about something else.
Okay.
We
Don't-
can. We'll get a flight to Kabul and we'll report ourselves from Kabul Airport.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, we'll wear a couple of hijabs.
Man dresses.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, curtains.
I'm up for that. Scotty, can we ship everything out and set up
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, we can get sworn into the Taliban too, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one
for
guy,
sure, yeah.
like the brother of
Yeah.
the. I just want the funky hat.
Yeah, goat herder hat. I'll have a few of those. Anyway, it's all good. We'll see what happens. Yeah, so thanks for watching, listening, commenting. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as much as you can. Thanks for commenting. Commenting is pretty important for just for visibility and ranking of the video, basically. So chuck your comments in the section if you can, and we'll be back next week with another show, another update on what's been going on between now and then. So
Thanks
Yeah.
for listening. See you next week.
take it easy.
Can't stop the signal now.